Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Welcome everyone. Basically, today we are going to cover disk management topic, right? That what is disk management? Basically, disk management is a tool, right? It's a tool which is built and available in your Windows 10, Windows 7, 8.1, Windows Server operating system. Uh, Instead of disk management tool, you can also use some third-party tools. If you Google disk management tool, you will find a lot of options there, right? But the agenda of today's topic is to focus on disk management, and we are going to cover, first of all, we will overview the disk management, and then we will talk about shrink volume, how to expand volume. We will also discuss the difference between basic versus dynamic disk. And then we will discuss the different types of volume, spanned volume, mirrored volume, stripped volume, RAID 5 volume. So all these things we are going to cover in today's lecture. Let's start from the very basic thing. Uh, as you can see here, let's assume that this is your Windows 10 machine, right? You can see here. I think the VMware tool is installed. Okay. When you double click on the PC, you can see we have a single partitions available. So this is my one of Windows 10 machine and I have 100 GB of disk and I am only showing a single volume. Sometime if you notice that uh, you purchase a new laptop and the operating system is already installed there and they already created a single partition. What if you need multiple partitions? So the option method number one is to uh, reinstall the operating system, and during installation you can do partitioning. So obviously if you have stored something on the desktop or if you have some data available on the C drive, all the data will be deleted. So the question is there any way that we can create another partition without any data loss, without installing operating system? So yes, we do have option available. You can simply right click on your computer and you can go to computer management. And here we can see disk management. So in this lecture, we are going to cover disk management. As you can see here, this is a tool built and available here. Uh, you might see some limitation using this tool. So if you want to do partition on your own way, then you can Google it, that disk management software, and you will see a lot of options here. Ease, US, free partition manager, 10 best free disk partition software tools. So I would not recommend to use any of these software, but if there is a certain requirement which is not fulfilled by the disk management tool, then you have the option of using third party softwares. So let's do one thing. As we can see, we have drive C and we still have almost 83.19 GB free space available. So we are going to shrink some space from this C drive and then we are going to create another partition. So that is our first topic, which is shrink volume. So you can simply right click on drive C and here you can click shrink volume. Once you click that, right, you will see the option. So I can shrink up to 83 GB of space. For example, your requirement is 61 GB, let's say. So you can simply write 61,000 and you will get almost 59 something GB. So you can click here and now I can see I have 59.57 GB unallocated space. I cannot utilize this space because this is a raw space. We need to create volume from this space. Shrink means separation, like, we shrink the volume. We had some free space available on drive C. So we just right click on drive C and we click shrink and we get 59.57 GB free space. So you can right click on this free space and here you can see an option called simple volume. When you click simple volume, you can create another partition. For example, you need, uh, let's say I need 10 GB partition, right? So you can simply put uh, the value, like how much space you required. So I think let's say we need 10 GB space. You can write 10 GB here, and which drive letter you want to assign. Let's say D. Do you want to give it a name? You can give it a name, just like in your personal machine, you have given some names like this is study. For the study material will be stored on the drive D. Entertainment material will be stored on the drive E. So you can give it a name. You can perform a quick format. You can select the file system. We have FAT32 and NTFS. We will also discuss in our uh, next lecture that what is the difference between NTFS and FAT32, and we will also do some labs on that. And you can see here we have a drive D uh, available now. So what we did, we shrink some space from drive C, and then we got some free space, which is also called unallocated space. And then we created another volume from that free space. And I want to create another volume as well because I need 3 volumes, for example. If you need more than 3 volume, you can repeat the process and that's it. But there is a certain limitation. Like in my previous lecture, when you visit my YouTube channel, you will see I have uploaded a lecture regarding how we can do partitioning. Like I explain the partitioning method using disk part. So this is also one of the tool, like you can use disk part. Here you can see and you can perform these things. Guys, give me 1 second. So you can also use disk part tool and you can shrink space from drive C and you can perform such tasks. So this is one method, right? So I think it should be clear that if you need more partitions, you can do that. What if you need more than 3 partitions? Is my voice clear? I think Mr. Junaid is saying that I'm not audible to him. Please connect your audio. Perfect. Okay, okay. Thank you. So what we did actually, we had a single disk. This is our disk, right? 100 GB disk we have. And there was a single partition of 100 GB. What we did, we shrink this volume and we got almost 60 GB space. And then we created 2 volumes or partition from that 60 GB. And that's it. That was our first task, that how we can shrink a volume. Okay, now let's talk about expand volume. For example, let's say you have 100 GB disk, right? Normally, what you guys do, you divide this disk into multiple partitions. And I have noticed people that they always give less space to drive C. For example, your drive C space is 30 GB. For example, your drive D space is 20 GB. And let's say you have a drive E and you have given a 50 GB space to drive E. And I'm 100% sure if I ask you, many of you will be answering me that yes, our drive C space is less than as compared to the other partitions. Because we think that we don't need much space on drive C, because we need more space on drive D and E so that we can save some pictures, some videos, some lectures, because drive C data can be removed or deleted when there is an issue in the operating system or if we are going to install new operating system, right? So let's say this is the same case with you people, and after some time you need more space on drive C, because whatever we are browsing, whatever we are downloading, whatever we are installing on our machine, by default it use the drive C space. So expand volume means that we are going to expand the size of drive C, which is 30 GB now. So I want to give some free space from the other drive. So this is our next task of today's topic, right? So one thing, as we can see, we have drive D and we have drive E. And let's say I need more space. The size of drive C is currently 40 GB. I want to add more space. So what I can do, I can right click on drive D and I can shrink some space from drive D. So keep in mind that when you shrink some space from drive D, an allocated space or the free space will be uh, generated here or created here. So keep in mind that we cannot assign this space to drive C by default using disk management tool. But if you have a third party softwares, then in that case you can use it. You can move this free space between C and D, and then you can simply right click on drive C and you can click extend volume and you can provide that space. So technically, this is something not possible with disk management tool, but yes, we do have an option available. What if we move some data from drive D to drive E, and then we simply right click on drive D and delete this volume? This is another option we have available. We can delete this volume, and when you click yes, the volume is deleted now. And then I can right click on drive C and I can extend volume. So if you have a question in your mind that when we delete a volume, what about the data? So obviously the data will be deleted as well. So make sure if you are adding some more space to drive D, first you need to move the data from that volume which is next to drive C. So this is another method. Like let's say you want to you don't need that data, or you have moved that data to other volume, you can simply delete volume and then you can right click on drive C and you can extend volume. Okay, so we just finished two steps. One is shrink volume and expand volume. I will pause for a while. If you have any question. Okay guys, so before we start our next portion of today's topic, let's first talk about basic versus dynamic disk, right? So we have two types of disk. One is called basic disk and the other one is dynamic disk. By default, all the disks are basic, but we can convert our disk into dynamic. If we have to convert our basic disk to dynamic, you can convert it without any data loss. Like you can see here, if you have a basic disk here, you can simply write and you can click convert to dynamic, and there will be no data loss. Nothing will change. Your data will be as it is. But let's say if you have a dynamic disk and you want to convert your dynamic disk from you want to convert your dynamic disk into basic, then first you need to delete all the partitions, right? Recording is already started, Ikram. So I will provide that recording to you guys after once we are done. So that is the story. So the first thing is let's first understand what is the difference between dynamic disk and basic disk, right? So I'm going to take some help from Google so that I can easily explain it to you. I think I found a very good slide here, right? And I think it's showable or not showable. Is it blur or is it okay? I think it should be okay now. Okay, it's still the same. Never mind, I can explain it like this. As you can see here, uh, we have one basic disk. This diagram is of a basic disk, and this is dynamic disk. Usually for personal machine, like if you have a Windows 10 machine. So normally this basic disk is used, but in the production environment, if you have a server, a machine, and if you have multiple disks attached to server hardware, then in that situation, we use dynamic disk. So let's first talk about the benefits of dynamic disk. What if I give you a task that, let's say you have a machine, this is your hardware, right? It could be a laptop, it could be a server hardware, it could be a desktop hardware. Let's say you have disk 1, right, of 10 GB. Let's say you have disk 2 of 10 GB. And let's say you have disk 3 of 10 GB. These are three different disks attached to your hardware. I know you have a question in your mind that our laptop has only one disk. Yes, this topic is not specifically for your personal machines. This topic is designed specifically for server hardware, right? Where you can see if you open a server hardware, you will see there will be a spaces that you can add multiple disk, right? And if you want to do this lab, if you just want to check, what you can do, you have a virtual machine here. You can simply right click on the virtual machine and you can add some disk here. Let me add 100 GB, sorry, 10 GB disk. This is disk 1. Let me add another disk. If you don't know how to add disk, I have some lectures on VMware Workstation. You can go through it and you will get the idea how you can add uh, multiple disk to a single virtual machine. And by the way, I'm also doing it right now, so you should be good. See, I just attach 3 more disks. So in my machine, I have 4 disks. On disk 1, I have installed operating system, but the rest of the disk I want to use for some other purposes. And you can see here, I think I need to restart the machine. It's fine. So you can see here. I have disk 1, disk 2, and disk 3. Initialize disk. And now you can see all the 3 disks are available here. So if you have multiple disks attached to your hardware, right? And if I give you a task that I want 20 GB volume, is it possible to create a 20 GB volume? if you have a 10 GB disk, this is something not possible. Because by default, all these disks are basic disks. You can see basic, basic, and basic. If I have to create partition, I will I will right click sample volume. So this volume will be only created here, right? If you want to create partition and want to utilize multiple disks, then first we need to convert our basic disk into dynamic disk. With dynamic disk, we get span volume option, we get mirrored volume option, we get stripped volume option, we get RAID file. So let's talk about span volume. What is span volume? So you can simply open a browser and you can write span volume. And here you can see a span volume combines, okay, let me write span volume disk limitation. You can see here up to 256 disks can be included in a span volume, which means that if you have a hardware and if you have 256 physical disks, you can combine them and you can create a single span volume. Let's say we have two disks only here. So you can combine these two disks or three disks. When you combine these three disks and you create a span volume, what will happen? A 30 GB volume will be created. So this is the benefit of dynamic disk, that you can combine multiple disks and you can create a single volume. Does it make sense? So what is the benefit of that? Let's say if you need more space, for example, there is an application and that application need 1 TB of volume size and you have 512 GB of disk. You can add another disk. You can convert those two disks into dynamic disk and you can create a spanned volume, and the size of that spanned volume will be 1 TB because it combines the space of multiple disks, right? And it will give you more space, right? What is the disadvantage of span volume, right? This is something you need to search, right? Uh, Let me just give you an overview. The, the span volume disadvantages, if any of the disk is failed, your volume will be deleted and all of your data will be lost. So there is no redundancy or backup mechanism in the span volume, right? Let's talk about, yes, uh, Noman, you are right. Noman question is that for span volume, do we have to make it dynamic? Yes, because these volumes are only available if your disk is dynamic disk. What is mirrored volume, right? Okay. Uh, if someone asks you what is the minimum disk requirement of span volume, so you can write that for span volume, right? The minimum disk is 2 and the maximum is 256, right? This is for the span volume. Now let's talk about mirrored volume. For mirrored volume, the minimum disk requirement is 2 and the maximum disk requirement is also 2. So if you have to create a mirrored volume, you need only 2 disks, right? So let's talk about mirrored volume. What is this thing? Let's say you have disk 1. Let's remove this disk 3. Let's say you have disk 1 and disk 2. You combine them and you created a mirrored volume the size of mirrored volume will be 10 GB, not 20. Because in mirrored volume, they are not uh, combining the space of both hard disks. Basically, mirrored volume is used for backup purpose. What is the benefit of that? Let's say you store some data, 1 GB data, on this 10 GB volume, but on the back end, the 1 GB data will be stored separately on this disk, and also the same copy of that data will be stored on disk 2. And if something happened, you can still see the data. If one disk failed, again, you can still see the data on the other disk. So if there is a need of backup, then you can use mirrored volume. Let me practically show you. Let's start from spanned volume. As you can see, we have basic disk, basic disk, basic disk. The first thing you can do is right click on the disk and click convert to dynamic disk. So I want to convert disk 2 and disk 3. Disk 1, disk 2, disk 3 to dynamic disk. You can see here now all the three disk types are dynamic. Then you can simply right click here and where we can see spanned volume. Once you click spanned volume, you can click next. I'm not able to click next because one disk is selected, and we explained that minimum disk requirement are 2, so we have to add the additional disk as well. So if you want to create a spanned volume, you need minimum 2, and I can also add the third disk as well because I can add up to 256 disk, right? So when you click next, okay, you can see you can assign a drive letter and you can give it any name. Once you click finish, after some time you will see that the size of the volume will be 20 GB. Are you getting the point? Okay, so let's give it some time, and you can see here, I can see drive D. The size of drive D is 20 GB because it combines the two disks together. Let me delete it. So this was one level. Let's perform mirror volume. When you right click on disk 1 or disk 2, any disk, and when you click mirrored volume, okay, notice one thing. When I deleted the volume, by default, the disk is converted into basic again. But when you right click on the basic disk and you select mirrored volume, right? I'm trying to add another disk. I cannot add more than 2. So the minimum and maximum requirement of mirrored volume is 2. You can click next. Okay, one more thing you can see here. 10 GB, 10 GB, but the volume size is 10 GB. The reason? It will not combine the space of both partitions because we have selected mirrored volume, and you can click perform quick format and finish. Okay, the operation you selected will convert the selected disk to dynamic. That's fine. Convert it. So now we can see that we have a mirrored volume created. And if I go to drive D and if I store some data here, let's say test, let me store some data. So the same copy of data will be stored on both disks, right? And when you click break mirrored volume, right? I think okay. And when you click break mirror volume, you can see here I have the copy of data stored on drive D and as well as in drive E. These are two separate disks, and I can delete it right now. Any questions so far? So this is how you can do that. To better understand this topic, I would highly recommend all of you to study RAID levels, right? RAID levels. RAID level 0 is also called stripping, right? RAID level 1 is mirroring is also called RAID 1, right? Stripping with dedicated parity, that is RAID 3, right? So I would highly recommend all of you to study something about RAID as well. So what we have discussed so far, we discuss uh, spanned volume and mirrored volume. Okay, let me repeat mirrored volume. Uh, Mirrored volume is used for backup purpose. If you have disk 1 and you have disk 2, you can combine these two disks and you can create a partition of 10 GB. And when you store some data on this volume, the copy of that data will be stored on both disks, right? So let me show you as I show you in my previous lessons. Like simply, first you need to convert your disk into dynamic. That is required, right? We can see we have 3 dynamic disks. But for mirror volume, I can only utilize 2 disks. So you can simply click on any of the disks. You can click new mirrored volume, and here you can select 2 disks. 10 GB, 10 GB, and it will give you a space of 10 GB because it will not combine the space of both disks. This is just used for backup or redundancy purpose, right? That is the story. We have this, a single volume will be created here, and when you store some data on that single volume, right, my data, so the same copy will be stored 2 times. As compared to spanned volume, maybe the performance of mirror is not good because whatever you stored, it will take uh, 2 times. It will utilize multiple time. Like if let's say you are storing 1 GB data. So in the backend, 2 GB data will be stored. 1 GB on disk one and the other 1 GB on the other disk. And you can also review this if you want to check if my mirror volume is working. For example, you can click break mirrored volume. When you click that, right, it will break the volume. And now you are showing 2 drives and you can see the same amount of data. So this is also good. For example, you have a use case and someone asks you that we need multiple copies of our data on both disks. So what you can do, you can combine those 2 disks and you can create a mirrored volume. You can attach that disk will be attached to a machine and your user will be storing data. After some time, you want to remove one of the disks, you can break the mirror volume, you can remove that disk and you can uh, take it with yourself and whatever you want. So this is how you can create a mirror volume, right? Stripped volume and spanned volume, both concepts are almost same, right? We can see spanned volume and stripped volume. But what is the difference between these two? Uh, Majid, I'm coming to your answer question. We have a question from Majidullah, and his question is, if suppose the disk is connected through network cable, is it possible? Yes, basically, this is something possible. Like uh, these concepts we basically use on storage arrays, which is why I ask you to search something about RAID levels. You will get your concept clear. And also, if you get some time, you can also check something related to storage arrays. In production environment, we have these boxes available. These are basically network attached storage or SAN, right? iSCSI storage arrays. And you can see we have multiple disks. So your storage administrator will be configuring the RAID levels there based on your requirements, your company's requirements, right? Okay. What is the difference between spanned volume and stripped volume? Both work same. The purpose of spanned volume was to get more space, combine multiple disks in order to get more space. In the same concept used in stripped volume, right? But let me tell you something. Let's say you have disk 1, the size of disk 1 is 20 GB, and disk 2 size is 20 GB, and disk 3 size is 10 GB. When you combine these three disks, the span volume size will be how much? 20, 20, and 10. So 50 GB space span volume will be created. But when you are going to create stripped volume with these disks, so the stripped volume size will be 30 GB because this disk has only 10 GB space available and the remaining has 20 GB space. So it will get the space equally from each disk. And stripped volume, it get uh, the equal space from each disk. So if you store some data, let's say if you are storing some data on stripped volume, right, it will equally utilize the spaces of each disk. In span volume, there is no such type of load balancing mechanism. So if you just need more space, you can combine all the spaces, whether all the disk size are same or different, doesn't matter. But in stripped volume, usually all the disk size need to be same. And if you have one disk that is 10 GB, but the remaining disk has 20 free space available, still during creation of stripped volume, it will only utilize 10 GB space from disk 2 and disk 3 to make it equal for all the disk, right? So you guys can also Google something related to stripped volume and span volume, and you will get the idea. With this configuration, we can create stripped volume, because you can see 10 GB, 10 GB is 10 GB. All the disk size are same. So we can easily create a 30 GB stripped volume. As compared to spanned volume, stripped volume performance will be better, right? There is a story behind that, and you can then read about that in details when you are doing this lab on your uh, virtual machines. The last thing of today's topic is RAID 5, but I'm not showing this option because this is something you can only utilize on the server operating system. So RAID 5 is a feature of server operating system. So I do have a Windows server available. Let me power on that machine, right? And then you can see here how many disks we have. We have only one disk, so I need to add more disk. Our disk number one, for example, I want to add 100 GB of disk one, right? And I can also add another disk. Let me create another disk as well. And let me add another disk. So now you can see here, let's assume that this is one of our server hardware and we have three disks attached to the server hardware. Okay, so let me log into this server operating system, right? I think I need. Okay, so in RAID 5, okay, is there any backup or redundancy plan in stripping and span volume? No. What if we need more space and also we need redundancy? We cannot utilize mirrored volume because when you are going to create mirrored volume, it will not combine the space of multiple disks. But we have another option available which is called RAID 5, which combines both. Uh, we can also extend or combine the space of disk, and we can also use a backup purpose as well. So let's assume we have three disks. Uh, Let me show you practically here. This is my server operating system, server 2022, right? And we have disk management option here. And I'm showing three newly added disks, disk 1, disk 2, and disk 3. So let me initialize all the disk, right? We just added these disks, so I need to initialize these disks. Only 5 minutes, guys, and we are done. When you click, you can see now RAID 5 because this feature is available only on server operating system. So do not worry if you have a Windows 10 machine and if you want to create a RAID volume, then you don't need to worry about that because this option is not of the Windows 10 feature. So this is something you can also discuss with someone like, hey, the benefit of server operating system is that we have more features available. We can run services on server operating system. So RAID 5, what, how it works actually. When we combine three disks in RAID 5, when we want to combine three disks and create a RAID 5 volume, what happens actually? The size of the RAID 5 volume will be 20 GB, right? So we can combine the space. This is one feature. Plus, the additional disk will be used as a backup or standby purpose. So if something happened between these two or any of these disks, we will have additional disk available. So this is how you can also provide a redundancy to your backup or to your data or disk, right? So let's click RAID 5 and I'm trying to click next, but I'm not able to because the minimum disk requirement of RAID 5 is 3 disk. What is the maximum disk requirement? You have to search for it. And when you click next, I can see 1, 2, 3. Technically, it should be 30 GB, but we are showing 20 GB because the 10 GB space is used as a backup for a backup purpose, right? So we get both features in RAID 5 volume. And this is how you can create a RAID 5 volume. So what we have discussed today, we started from shrink volume, then we discuss expand volume, We also talked about basic versus dynamic disk. We also discussed spanned volume, mirrored volume, stripped volume, and also RAID 5. An action item for you guys is to read about RAID levels, which is very important. Try to understand it, right? And also, if you check more about basic versus dynamic, you will see a lot of information on the internet. So I hope you learned something today. Inshallah, see you in my next session.
Hello, Assalamu